Good morning. The headlines. Police say real IRA behind London bomb explosion. Ecstatic homecoming for US spy plane crew. And hangovers this morning for Man United fans. The head of Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist branch says the real IRA is behind last night's explosion at a postal sorting office in London. The blast blew out windows at the building in Hendon. No one was working there at the time. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Alan Fry said Scotland Yard didn't receive a coded warning before the blast. With more, here's Suzanne Bush.
Emergency services were called to the post office sorting office in Hendon, northwest London, shortly before 11:30 last night. The blast was caused by a device packed with high explosives, which had been placed in the now bricked-up former entrance of the sorting office. It blew out windows in the building, but there are no reports of any injuries. No coded warnings were received, but the head of the Met's anti-terrorist branch says he believes it was the work of the dissident Irish terror group, the Real IRA.
I must look at this in the context of the number of devices that have exploded in London in the past year, and clearly we are looking at a high explosive, and as such my suspicions must go towards that this is a further attack by the Real IRA.
The sorting office is on the usually busy Edgware Road, and while the damage caused was minor, police say the device was planted with no thought to the injuries it may have caused.
The sinister aspect of this attack is that there was no warning, and anyone could have been easily walking past, driving past the building when the device exploded. We could have had someone with serious injuries.
Last night's blast comes just 6 weeks after the explosion which rocked the BBC TV centre. Police say the device was of a similar size to that used at Hammersmith Bridge last year. The Edgware Road will remain closed today while Scotland Yard search the area. Suzanne Bush, ITN.
The 24 crew members of an American Navy spy plane detained in China for 11 days have arrived back at their home base to a hero's welcome. Before the final leg of their journey home, they told investigators they did it right and there was no reason to apologise to the Chinese. Here's Anise Risley.
Thousands of jubilant and relieved Americans gathered at the Naval Air Base on Washington State's Whidbey Island to welcome their heroes. It was a rousing and emotional reception as the crew stepped off the military plane that flew them home. Politicians and top military brass joined relatives, friends and colleagues for an official red carpet welcome. Mission Commander Lieutenant Shane Osborne spoke for his crew.
First of all, I'd like to thank God for allowing my crew and myself to be here today. Because it was definitely him flying that plane. And I'd also like to thank my 23 other crewmates who, without them, I wouldn't be standing here right now.
Before the final leg of their return journey to the American mainland, the 24 service men and women spent 2 days being debriefed in Hawaii. Under investigation, their commander said there was no need to apologize to China. The crew was held for 11 days until the Bush administration ended the stalemate by admitting it was very sorry for the incident in which the US spy plane was forced to land on Hainan Island after a collision with a Chinese fighter jet whose pilot was lost. The US Navy is giving the 21 men and 3 women crew time off to recover. They immediately headed home to spend the Easter holiday with their families. Their ordeal is over, although their surveillance plane is yet to be recovered from China. Anise Risley, ITN.
The family of murdered British schoolgirl Caroline Dickinson are welcoming what they've called a fantastic breakthrough in the 5-year inquiry. French officials say that DNA samples taken from the prime suspect, Francisco Montes in Florida, are very similar to those taken from the crime scene in Brittany. Here's Philip Rees-Smith.
It was the announcement reporters had been waiting all yesterday evening for, delayed for 3 hours as laboratory tests continued. Public prosecutor Yves Boivin announced that DNA samples taken from the prime suspect were very similar to those taken from the crime scene. Speaking in Launceston in Cornwall, Caroline's father welcomed the news but has warned that there are still many legal processes to go through before the case can finally be closed.
Wouldn't like to say anything that's going to prejudice the continuing investigation and the legal processes, but we're very happy with the way things are at the present time.
DNA was taken from Spanish waiter Francisco Montez in Florida and compared to samples taken from the crime scene. He'd been arrested on a completely unrelated charge at this American hostel, but his name was recognised by an immigration officer who knew of the case. French officials refused to name Montez, only saying they wanted to question the person held in Florida. They also refused to say whether they would make a formal extradition request. Caroline Dickinson from Bodmin in Cornwall was 13 when she was raped and suffocated as she slept in a room with friends at this hostel in Brittany 5 years ago. She was on a school trip. Her friends said they heard her crying during the night but thought she was having a nightmare. The French authorities were criticised at the start of this investigation for failing to find any strong leads. It looks as if now, after 5 years of searching, they may be a step closer to working out who killed Caroline Dickinson. Philip Ray-Smith, ITN.
The Education Secretary, David Blunkett, and his opposite number in the Conservative Party, Theresa May, were both heckled at the annual Teachers' Conference in Cardiff. But the government's move to alleviate pressure on teachers falsely accused of abuse was greeted with applause. Romilly Weeks reports.
Marjorie Evans is greeted by David Blunkett on the conference platform in Cardiff. Today, Mrs Evans, who was cleared of assaulting a boy at her junior school in Gwent, will address teachers herself. In the light of her case, the government has promised to try and cut the amount of time it takes to deal with allegations brought by pupils against teachers, a move welcomed by the teachers' union. The other issue due to be debated today is likely to be more controversial. The NUT have been at loggerheads with the government over the length of teachers' hours. Union leaders are proposing a resolution that would see teachers entering talks with the government to negotiate for a shorter working week. If the motion is not carried, it makes strike action a possibility in schools throughout England. Romilly Weeks, ITN.
2 British peacekeeping soldiers wounded when a landmine exploded under their vehicle are still being treated at a military hospital. The soldier who died in the incident still hasn't been named. The road near the Macedonian border was thought to be clear and had been used many times in the past few days. The men all serve with the 9th 12th Lancers, which are based in Germany. Ministers have moved another step closer to a foot and mouth vaccination programme after government scientists said it could help reduce the risk of infection. Meanwhile, the government has tried to reassure people about the landfill sites being put into use to dispose of hundreds of thousands of animals slaughtered because of foot and mouth. This report from Harry Smith.
Around the country, protests have been growing near sites chosen for disposing of animal carcasses from the foot and mouth epidemic. This was the scene in the Devon town of Halsworthy yesterday, where families say they'll be engulfed in smoke if plans for a giant funeral pyre go ahead.
If the wind goes in the wrong direction, this town is going to be full of black smoke, making it almost unbearable.
What goes up comes down. We've all been given a leaflet and it's frightening.
But this is the problem ministers have to deal with, and it's growing, with the number of carcasses lying in fields now more than double what it was 10 days ago. The government is looking at another 100 sites where it can bury the remains. Ministers have moved to reassure local concerns.
Those landfill sites have to be used quite rightly in accordance with the instructions that we receive and the advice we receive from the Environment Agency. We have to follow proper environmental and health considerations here.
William Hague, yesterday seeing how some of the tourist industry is coping, again called for the army to take full charge.
MAF are, I know they're working very hard, but they're totally overstretched and are not able to deal with something on this scale.
There's been another setback in Northern Ireland. One confirmed case in County Tyrone and another suspected could bring the number of cases there to 3. As a result, the Protestant marching organisation, the Apprentice Boys of Derry, announced they were calling off all their marches this Easter to help stop the spread of the disease. There are signs that ministers are preparing the ground for a programme of vaccination in the worst affected areas. But officially, the ministry is still saying this is no more than an option which hasn't been ruled out. Harry Smith, ITN, at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Mobile phones may have made all our lives a little easier, but there are still questions about just how much damage they may be causing to our health. A team of British and Australian researchers in Brisbane have come up with a way to stop powerful radiation emitted by the phone being absorbed by the brain. Kirsty Thompson explains.
Just how much using your mobile phone can harm your health is an issue which continues to divide scientists around the world. What is known is that mobile phones transmit low-level radiation through antennas held near the head. Scientists say up to 70% of these emissions can be absorbed by the brain. How dangerous these rays are in the long term is still not clear. To reduce the risk, scientists in Australia have designed an antenna which steers harmful radiation away from the person using the phone.
If you're using it in the traditional manner, of course using it on a hands-free or in a car kit is a much better option because you've removed the source of the radiation further from your body, which makes a very significant difference.
The researchers say the antenna can halve the amount of radiation absorbed by the brain and therefore reduce the chances of developing brain tumours. With the number of people using mobile phones worldwide increasing and with more questions than answers about the risks associated with their use, the device is sure to be welcomed. Kirsty Thompson, ITN.
Sorry about the loss of sound there in that report. Pope John Paul has opened Easter Sunday celebrations with a traditional blessing of fire at a service in St. Peter's Basilica. The pontiff, who turns 81 next month, walked slowly and leaned on his walking cross. Later this morning, he'll deliver his traditional Easter greeting in more than 50 languages to thousands of people gathered in St. Peter's Square. And now for a look at this morning's papers. The Telegraph leads with the news that the government is to announce a vaccination programme to try to stem the foot and mouth outbreak, and claims that the Prime Minister was forced into a U-turn. Its Easter picture shows sheep grazing around 3 crosses erected to provide a symbol of hope for farmers. The foot and mouth crisis is the subject of the Mail's front page. It claims that the sheep dealer allegedly blamed for spreading the disease across Britain has received £1 million in compensation. With foot and mouth, the Observer reports that people could be at risk from the government's new guidelines on animal disposal. Some petty crimes are to be decriminalised, according to The Times. Offences such as television and vehicle evasion would be taken out of the criminal courts. The Earl and Countess of Wessex are to be given an ultimatum by Buckingham Palace over their future business interests. And next to a picture of the murdered British schoolgirl, Caroline Dickinson, the newspaper reports that detectives are close to identifying her killer. The Sunday Mirror leads with the Caroline Dickinson murder investigation and claims the agony is over. And the Sunday Express screams, "Get us out of here," and goes on to reveal that a record 40 million people will take holidays abroad this summer. The paper shows a smiling Chris Evans and Billy Piper returning from their foreign holiday. It's now 17 minutes to 6. You're watching the ITV Morning News. Coming up, our review of the week. Join us again after the break. Welcome back to the ITV Morning News. Now our review of the week. The Leeds United players Lee Bowyer and Jonathan Woodgate learned last Tuesday they will face a retrial. The case against them that they and 2 others attacked an Asian student will be heard all over again in October. The trial at Hull Crown Court collapsed because of an article in the Sunday Mirror. Harry Smith sent this report from Hull Crown Court.
Lee Bowyer wasn't in court to hear the judge set a date for his retrial. Excused from attending today, he was packing his bags at a nearby hotel where he's been staying throughout the trial. He and the other defendants now have to wait another 6 months to learn their fate. Bowyer and his teammate Jonathan Woodgate, seen here leaving court yesterday, denied 2 assault charges along with 2 of Woodgate's friends. It was alleged that they were involved in a vicious attack on student Safraz Najib after a night of heavy drinking in the centre of Leeds. In court, the judge, Mr. Justice Poole, listened to legal argument, which we were banned from reporting, before announcing his decision that the retrial would take place in Hull on October the 8th. One of the defence barristers said he was vigorously opposed to a retrial, and others indicated they would try to get the case thrown out before the new trial got underway. Some of the mountain of evidence which has sustained this marathon case was later removed from the court. As this was happening, the newspaper whose article led to the trial being abandoned made its first public statement on the affair. The Sunday Mirror said, "We are currently seeking to establish the precise editorial and legal processes that were taken last week. We would like to take this opportunity to express our deep regret about the subsequent chain of events." The Attorney General will now decide whether or not the Sunday Mirror is to be prosecuted for contempt of court, a charge which could carry a hefty fine, some of the costs of the abandoned trial, and even prison sentences for the paper's staff. Harry Smith, ITN, Hull Crown Court.
Last week, Tesco became the first of the supermarket chains to make an annual profit of £1 billion. The figures drew criticism from farmers and from the Liberal Democrats about the deals shoppers and suppliers get. But Tesco said only their competitors have been hurt by their profit. Our business editor Caroline Kerr had this report on Tuesday.
The key to Tesco's success is the broad scope of its appeal to consumers. In food, it rivals the most upmarket retailers with its finest range, while simultaneously advertising discount prices. Whether it's selling electrical goods or brand-name jeans, Tesco's is racing ahead of the competition. Last year, it made more than £1 billion before tax in profits. That's nearly double the last set of profits from Sainsbury's, who made £509 million, and 4 times more than Safeway's. In fact, Tesco alone now controls 15% of the food market. For decades, Tesco trailed behind Sainsbury's and was considered rather down market. But analysts say it deserves its current success.
Food shopping is something that people do with great frequency, and the food retailer has to deliver in terms of quality, in terms of price. The shopping experience needs to be hassle-free, and I think that Tesco deliver that with tremendous consistency right across the country.
Tissues. Tesco works hard on its image, but today farmers and consumer groups accused it of making excessive profits. The company says it's only taking 3p out of every pound.
Our profits have only grown actually because we've attracted more customers, and we'll only be successful in the future if we listen to customers, watch how their lives change and change the business in order to stay useful, stay relevant to them.
Up until now, Tesco has been renowned for being innovative and customer orientated. But the last British retailer to make more than £1 billion in 1 year was Marks & Spencer. And there's a lesson there. Tesco can't afford to become complacent if it's to maintain its cutting edge. Caroline Kerr, ITN, South London.
A stampede at a South African football match in Johannesburg left more than 50 people dead inside and outside the ground. In a haunting reminder of the Hillsborough disaster, people were pulled from the crowd and given resuscitation on the pitch. It appeared the match at Ellis Park Stadium had been oversold. Tim Hewitt sent in this report from Johannesburg.
The tragedy was unfolding as the match continued. Behind one goal, paramedics were already struggling to revive people who had been crushed as the crowd swelled out of control. Eventually, the scale of what was happening became apparent.
Going to have to stop the game here by the looks of things. Robert Peterson there.
In scenes reminiscent of the Hillsborough disaster, there was now a desperate battle to save scores of people who were injured and dying. This match was dubbed the Soweto Derby, the biggest fixture in South Africa's Premier League. It appears that far too many tickets had been sold and that the capacity of Ellis Park was massively exceeded. Most of the fatalities occurred outside the ground. Police used tear gas to disperse an angry crowd unable to get inside, but instead they caused a stampede. A helicopter was used to ferry some of the injured to hospital, but hundreds of people were crushed and trampled, far too many for the emergency services to handle. Desperate family members trying to find missing relatives have been advised to call the government morgue, but not until the morning. There is still enormous confusion here, and the death toll is rising. It will be many hours yet before it becomes clear exactly how many people have lost their lives. Tim Hewitt, ITN, Johannesburg.
The man advising the government on the foot and mouth crisis gave an upbeat assessment of the crisis last Wednesday. The chief scientific advisor said the outbreak was finally flattening out. The Prime Minister was also being upbeat in his role as tourism promoter. But as our political correspondent Lauren Taylor reported, he didn't get it all his own way in Devon.
For a countryside devastated by foot and mouth, a glimmer of hope today, as government scientists believe the disease has finally peaked. But as the Prime Minister found out in Devon, there's real anger among those affected. He was harangued by a woman whose business is being destroyed.
Where do we go from here? How are you going to help us?
The single most important thing, obviously, is to make sure that we beat the disease. But if you leave your...
We agree. We don't want it on Exmoor either, but we need help now.
Exactly, and if you just allow me for 1 minute. I was just going to say to you, if you leave your name and address with someone here, I will get in touch with you personally as to what help we can give you.
Although most farmers and the government have condemned illegal movements of sheep, which are blamed for some new outbreaks, restrictions are causing real welfare problems. Some healthy animals kept indoors are running out of feed because they can't be moved outside even a short distance.
You can see where the sheds are. All we want to do is get the livestock out of the sheds, across the road, which is approximately 5 or 6 yards, through that gateway, but MAF won't let us.
On day 50 of the outbreak, there were 28 new cases across the country, taking the total to 1,232. There does, though, seem to be some evidence that the daily number of new cases has peaked. On the 31st of March, it hit 50, but since then the number has generally fallen, except for a slight rise in the last few days.
So, just in mathematical terms, it would appear that we could say with cautious optimism that we have passed the worst.
Amid such signs of progress, the government announced plans today to alter restrictions so that more farmers who are so far unaffected by foot and mouth can move their animals to slaughter, and to reduce the 10-kilometre exclusion zones in some areas so that farms can begin to go back to normal. Lauren Taylor, ITN, at the Ministry of Agriculture.
And that was our review of the week. Now sport, first football, and Manchester United have won the Premiership for the third consecutive year. They beat Coventry in a midday kick-off and then watched their nearest rivals, Arsenal, lose all hope of catching them with a surprise home defeat against Middlesbrough. Peter Staunton reports.
There was never any question about the ultimate destination of the league title, but even Sir Alex wasn't expecting the prize quite so soon. Unlike many sides this season, at least Coventry didn't hand the 3 points over at Old Trafford. And if the Midlands team avoids relegation, John Hartson will be the unlikely hero. He gave Coventry the lead before United's Dwight York brought his team level. And then he put them ahead. But Coventry weren't finished. Hartson came up with an equaliser. But Gordon Strachan's team ran out of steam in the second half. 2 late goals gave United the points. Giggs' long-range header, followed by a Scholes long shot. The manager was off to follow Arsenal's progress at home to Middlesbrough, and their shock defeat meant he's become the most successful manager in the history of English football.
But it just tells you about the phenomenal consistency of the players, the drive and the determination, and I think that is why they've done so well in the Premier Division since it started. But obviously winning the first one opened the door, and from then on they've never looked back.
They were singing the praises of another Old Trafford legend. Brian Robson's Middlesbrough had provided United with their unexpected bonus. Now the champions have to go and prove themselves in Europe, which won't be quite so easy. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport.
Now with a roundup of the other games, here's Ian Abrahams.
Not even Manchester United could have expected Arsenal to lose at home to Middlesbrough and give them the title. The Gunners went into the game with an unbeaten home record and having conceded just 8 goals at home in the league. Their opening goal, though, was an own goal. Dean Windass's shot going in off the Brazilian Edu. Middlesbrough were 1-0 up. Arsenal's other boy from Brazil presented Middlesbrough with their second, a Silvinho own goal. Before the Colombian Hamilton Ricard ensured a 3-0 Middlesbrough win and the championship going to Old Trafford, the quickest ever victory by a Premiership team in the championship race. Manchester City manager Joe Royle wasn't delighted with Middlesbrough's win. His side are still 5 points away from safety despite winning at Leicester. Their opening goal was a scrappy affair scored by Sean Gota. Adi Akinbayi equalised for Leicester before City's winner from Paulo Wanchop, an extravagant back heel from the Costa Rican. He remains an enigma, but what a goal to win a game for City. Derby are back in trouble after losing 3-1 at West Ham. Frederick Canuti scored the opening goal. The second came from Frank Lampard. West Ham's third from the recalled Joe Cole. Toddy Gudjonsson scored Derby's consolation. Bobby Robson made his first return to Portman Road for 19 years, but his Newcastle side went down to a Marcus Stewart penalty, Ipswich up to third. The comeback of the day belonged to Spurs, 2 down inside 12 minutes at Sunderland, Kevin Van first, and then Niall Quinn putting the Black Cats ahead. But Stephen Clements pulled one back in the second half before Gary Doherty scored twice, the makeshift striker ensuring that Spurs won away under Glenn Hoddle for the first time in the league. Dion Dublin scored inside 73 seconds for Villa at home to Everton, who equalised through Villa old boy David Unsworth. The winning Villa goal came from Ian Taylor. And Chelsea still harbour hopes of reaching Europe next season after Gustavo Poyet's winner at home to Southampton. Ian Abrahams, ITN Sport.
This is the ITV Morning News. It's 3 minutes to 6 on Sunday, the 15th of April. Time for a final look at today's top stories. The head of Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist branch says the real IRA is behind last night's explosion at a postal sorting office in London. The blast blew out windows at the building in Hendon. No one was working there at the time. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Alan Fry said Scotland Yard didn't receive a coded warning before the blast. The 24 crew members of an American Navy spy plane detained in China for 11 days have arrived back at their home base to a hero's welcome. Before the final leg of their journey home, they told investigators they did it right and there was no reason to apologise to the Chinese. The family of murdered schoolgirl Caroline Dickinson are welcoming what they've called a fantastic breakthrough in the 5-year inquiry. French officials say that DNA samples taken from the prime suspect, Francisco Montes in Florida, are very similar to those taken from the crime scene in Brittany. And that's all we've got time for. GMTV is next, and the lunchtime news on ITV is at noon. Meanwhile, goodbye from us till tomorrow morning.